corrupt judge refuses to hear a black elderly man's case. What the man does next is shocking. Elijah Carter stood in courtroom 4B, tall, proud, yet aged by time. In his hands, a photo of his late wife Ruth and a folder filled with deeds, tax receipts, and land records dating back to 1867, when his great-grandfather, a freed slave, bought the land they were now trying to take. The courtroom was cold, both in air and in spirit. Harsh fluorescent lights bounced off marble walls and polished shoes. No one looked at Elijah with respect. Some glanced with contempt. Others smirked as if he was already defeated. A woman in the third row whispered behind her hand. Another one of them clinging to history like it still matters. A man beside her chuckled. Then came the sound that made every spine snap straight. All rise for the Honorable Judge Winston Bexley. The heavy oak doors swung open, and in walked the man who would determine the Carter family's fate. Judge Bexley's black robes trailed behind him like a shadow hungry for light. His silver hair was slicked back, face stone-carved and expressionless, except for the permanent crease of disdain between his brows. He didn't look at Elijah, not even once, as he adjusted himself in the leather chair behind the bench and flicked open the case file with disinterest. Carter versus Kingsland Development Corporation, the clerk announced. Elijah's lawyer, a public defender, barely out of law school, fumbled with his notes. Your Honor, Mr. Carter is here today to contest the wrongful seizure of his family's property, land that has been in his family for over 150 years. He has substantial documentation, including the original deed. Approach the bench. Judge Bexley cut him off with the crispness of a blade. He didn't glance up. Elijah stood. Each step toward the bench was a lifetime. The soles of his shoes echoed across the polished floor like slow thunder, and with each footfall he could feel the eyes of the room pressing on him, judging, dismissing, erasing. He stopped at the podium, cleared his throat. Your Honor, he began, voice steady but not without tremor, this land, my family's land, was purchased in 1867 by Benjamin Carter, my great-grandfather. We've paid every tax, fought through every storm. My wife Ruth, God rest her soul, documented every inch of that property. I have here the original deed, notarized receipts, and property records going back 4 generations. That won't be necessary, Judge Bexley interrupted, waving a hand without looking up. Elijah blinked, unsure. Sir, the documents show... Mr. Carter, Bexley said, finally raising his icy gaze. This court recognizes current ownership records filed with the county, which reflect a valid transfer of title to Kingsland Development. Unless you have evidence of a criminal conspiracy, which I doubt, you are wasting the court's time. But Your Honor, Elijah insisted, holding up the folder like it contained his soul. Those records were falsified. My wife, before she passed, she gathered proof. If you just... I said that won't be necessary, Bexley thundered, slamming his gavel. The crack echoed like a gunshot. The gallery stirred. A few snickers. Someone muttered, Here we go again. Elijah stood frozen, face flushed, breathing uneven. This court, Bexley said, voice like glass breaking, does not exist to entertain sentimental tales about ancestors and forgotten farmland. Your claims are antiquated, irrelevant. This is a modern legal system, not a history museum. The gavel came down again, harder. Case dismissed. The words struck Elijah like fists. His hands dropped. The folder slipped from his fingers, papers spilling across the floor like the scattered bones of his legacy. No one moved to help him. No one cared. The bailiff approached, nudging him with impersonal efficiency. Sir, you'll need to leave. Elijah didn't argue. He bent down slowly, painfully, gathering the pieces of his past off the cold floor. The courtroom buzzed with whispered amusement. Should have sold the land when he had the chance, someone scoffed. He turned and walked out, holding Ruth's photo tightly, like it was the last thing tethering him to sanity. The doors of the courtroom closed behind him with a dull thud, like the ceiling of a tomb. Outside, the corridor was equally unfeeling. Lawyers brushed past him, phones rang, paperwork flew, and in the middle of it all, Elijah Carter stood still, a man who had just been erased by a system designed to forget men like him. His breath caught in his throat, not from age, but from humiliation so deep it burned. The judge hadn't even looked at the documents, hadn't read a single page, hadn't acknowledged the generations of sacrifice wrapped in those yellowing papers. That courtroom didn't just dismiss a case, it dismissed a history, a bloodline, a promise. Elijah walked out of the courthouse, the wind slicing through his coat, the city moving on without him. Above him, the American flag flapped in the wind, a symbol that once meant something, once gave men like him hope. But today, it only reminded him of everything that had been stolen. And the war he had no choice but to keep fighting. Elijah Carter stepped into his apartment like a man returning from war, scarred, silent, and carrying the weight of something no one else could see. The door creaked shut behind him with a low groan, echoing the exhaustion in his bones. Outside, the city pulsed on, oblivious. Inside, silence pressed in around him like a fog. He stood there for a long moment, unmoving, the courtroom's final gavel still pounding in his memory like a war drum. Then, as if guided by something deeper than thought, Elijah walked to the corner of the room where Ruth's chair still sat, untouched since the day she passed. Beside it, on the shelf lined with family Bibles and photo albums, was the small wooden box he had almost forgotten existed. The grain of the oak was worn smooth by her hands. His fingers trembled as he reached for it. He set it gently on the dining table, sat down and opened the lid. There it was. Ruth's journal. Bound in faded blue leather, the edges soft from use, it smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. Elijah ran a hand over the cover. Her handwriting had always been elegant, tight cursive lines that never wavered, even when her body had begun to fail her. She had written in this every night after dinner, always saying, one day someone might need to know the truth. He hadn't understood back then. He did now. He flipped it open. Page after page unfolded like a weapon carefully assembled in silence. Names, dates, copies of documents, receipts, annotated property tax changes, and more than anything, patterns. July 3rd, received second tax notice this month. Amount increased by $417 without explanation. I called the office. They claimed it was a clerical update, but the neighbor down the road, Mr. Tilson, said his taxes went up the same day. Same amount. He's black too. September 11th. Spoke to the woman at the assessor's office again. She wouldn't put anything in writing. Told me off record. There's talk of redevelopment zones. I'd keep my head down if I were you. October 28th. Someone from Kingsland Development showed up at our door. Said they could help with the paperwork if we were willing to sign a few things. Offered cash on the spot. I told them to leave. Elijah was furious. Each entry burned. Each line was a blade, cutting through years of quiet hope. Elijah read in silence, his heart a drumbeat of rage and sorrow. Ruth had seen it all, and she had written it down, not for herself, for him, for whoever would listen. Keys rattled at the door. A moment later, Andre stepped inside, his laptop bag slung over one shoulder, face flushed from the cold and frustration. I came as soon as I saw the news, he said, voice tight. They really just threw it out, didn't they? Elijah looked up from the journal, eyes heavy with grief. Didn't even read a single page, he whispered. Didn't even look at Ruth's work. Andre's jaw clenched. He walked over and took the seat beside his grandfather, scanning the open pages of the diary. She documented all this? Every last thing, Elijah said, pushing the journal toward him. She knew they'd come for it, knew they'd try to erase us. She wrote it all down. Andre's fingers danced across the pages. He could see the precision, the patterns, the way Ruth had lined up timestamps, transaction records, handwritten receipts. She was methodical. This is evidence, real evidence. But it's not enough, is it? Elijah asked, voice barely audible. They already took the land. The judge's word is law. Andre's eyes flicked up. Maybe the law's broken, but that doesn't mean we can't use the truth. He stood abruptly and walked to the corner of the room where an old radio sat on the shelf, a clunky relic from another era. It had been Ruth's favorite. She used to sit beside it on Sunday mornings, listening to gospel while tending to her plants. Andre knelt down, studying it. Elijah, he said slowly, did Grandma ever mention keeping backups of this? Elijah frowned. She said she mailed a few things to her sister, but backups? Like digital? Andre carefully turned the radio around. The back panel was loose. He pried it open and froze. Inside, tucked in a hollowed-out cavity behind the speaker, was a flash drive, taped in place, labeled in Ruth's careful handwriting. If they take the papers, the truth lives here. Andre exhaled slowly. She was 3 steps ahead of them. He plugged it into his laptop. The screen blinked to life. Dozens of folders appeared. Scanned deeds, tax payment screenshots, recorded phone calls, photos of visits from real estate reps, even time-stamped logs of mail with mysteriously altered postmarks. And then, an Excel file titled Cross-Match Patterns. Andre opened it, his breath caught. Holy! He stopped himself. Grandpa, do you see this? It's not just your land. She tracked 12 other families. Same tactics, same timelines, same forged tax adjustments, same courtrooms. Elijah's eyes narrowed. It was never just about me. No, Andre said, eyes locked to the screen. This is a machine, a system designed to rob people like you, and Grandma documented every gear. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the truth was taking up too much space to fit within 4 walls. Andre copied the files to an encrypted drive, his hands moving fast. We're taking this to someone who'll listen. If the courts won't hear it, the public will. Journalists, civil rights lawyers. This is too big to bury. Elijah stood, slower now, but taller than before. His hand rested on Ruth's journal, his fingers trembling. She gave everything to keep this safe, he said quietly. Even when cancer ate her bones, she stayed up late printing copies, writing names, hiding drives. She told me, they'll try to silence you, so I'll speak louder, on paper. Andre looked up. Then let's make her voice thunder. But as the truth began to spread beyond closed courtrooms and dusty archives, the cost of speaking out grew heavier and far more dangerous. The first sign came at 3:12 a.m. A sudden crash shattered the silence in Elijah Carter's home. A thunderclap of broken glass. He jolted awake in his chair, heart pounding, breath caught. The front window had exploded inward, scattering shards across the living room floor like jagged diamonds. A brick lay at the center, wrapped in duct tape and hatred. Scrawled across the side in thick, angry black ink were 5 chilling words. Leave it alone, old man. Elijah stood slowly, trembling, not from fear but from fury. His eyes swept over the mess, the blood trickling from a shallow cut on his palm. They'd come for his dignity now, just as they had come for his land. But he wasn't backing down. Not after everything Ruth had done, not after the documents she'd preserved, not after the truth had started to burn its way through the lies. The next attack came 2 days later, Sunday morning. The sky was clear, the air crisp. Elijah had just passed the gate to First Baptist Church, his sanctuary, his routine, his place of peace, when 2 men stepped out from behind a dumpster. He didn't recognize them. He didn't have time to. A fist landed in his side. Another crashed into his face. He stumbled backward, ribs cracking, blood filling his mouth. He collapsed near the sidewalk, one hand clawing toward the iron gate, trying to call for help. The last thing he heard before they ran was a voice whispering close to his ear. You keep digging, and we'll bury you next. He was found minutes later by Sister Thompson, who screamed for help as she knelt beside his bloodied body. Paramedics arrived quickly. The scene was cordoned off, but the message had already been delivered loud and clear. Elijah Carter had become dangerous, and they were going to silence him. Andre received the envelope that same afternoon. No return address, no postmark. Just his name, handwritten in all caps. Inside, a single photograph, him standing outside the courthouse next to Maya Henderson, the reporter who'd published the leaked documents. On the back, a note written in red ink. You're making powerful enemies. Last chance. Andre's hands shook. He looked up from the picture, then back down. This wasn't a warning. It was a declaration of war. He grabbed his keys and rushed out the door, heading straight for the hospital. Elijah had been admitted with 2 broken ribs, a fractured cheekbone, and severe blood loss. The doctors said he was stable, but they didn't sound confident. Andre paced the hallway like a soldier trapped in a siege, heart hammering against his chest, rage simmering beneath his skin. Finally, a nurse motioned for him. Room 217. He stepped inside quietly. The hospital room was dimly lit, the only sound the rhythmic beep of machines and the quiet hum of the IV. Elijah looked smaller than usual, wrapped in layers of white linen, but his eyes, those sharp, fire-fed eyes, were awake, watching, waiting. Andre moved to his side. He opened his mouth to speak, but Elijah raised a trembling hand. "Don't say anything yet," he rasped. His voice was weak, dry, but there was no mistaking the steel beneath it. "Just listen." Andre nodded, swallowing the knot in his throat. "I've lived long enough to know what this is," Elijah whispered. "They're not just trying to scare us. They're trying to erase us." He coughed, blood in the corner of his lips, and Andre reached for a tissue, but Elijah shook his head. "No time for that," he muttered. "Listen to me, boy. If I don't make it to the end of this, if I don't live to see those bastards fall, you finish it. You hear me?" Andre's voice cracked. "Don't say that. You're not—" "You finish it," Elijah said, louder now, eyes burning into his grandson's. "Not just for me, for your grandmother, for every family they stole from. You finish it." Andre blinked away the tears. "I will," he said. "I swear to you, I will." Elijah nodded, his breathing shallow now. Ruth knew this would get ugly. That's why she made copies. That's why she kept everything so organized, so you'd have something to fight with. She gave us the map. Now you carry the torch. Andre leaned in, gripping his grandfather's hand. "You're going to walk out of this hospital," he said, voice thick. "You're going to see them exposed. You're going to see them answer for what they did." Elijah smiled faintly. "And if I don't," he whispered, "you make sure someone does." The machines beeped. The lights flickered faintly. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that within the four walls of that hospital room, a generational promise was being passed like a sacred weapon. Andre Carter left the hospital the following evening, shoulders tight with tension, mind spinning with the weight of what he had promised Elijah. The hallway lights flickered overhead, casting long, restless shadows across the polished floor. His grandfather was stable, but barely. The doctors had warned him. Any new complication could turn critical. And so Andre carried more than just his laptop bag. He carried Elijah's unspoken fears, Ruth's careful legacy, and the knowledge that powerful enemies were tightening their grip. He drove through city traffic, hands clenched on the steering wheel. Anonymous threats still haunted him. Those notes, that photo, all the hateful graffiti. The vow he'd made to Elijah replayed in his head like a mantra. "You finish it if I can't." By the time he pulled up to his cramped studio apartment, the sun had dipped below the rooftops, painting the sky a bruised purple. Every step felt heavier than the last. There was a figure waiting by his front door, a tall man in a sleek charcoal suit, arms folded, posture annoyingly casual. As Andre approached, the man pivoted to face him, a thin smile stretching across an impeccably groomed face. "Mr. Carter, correct?" the man asked, voice velvet smooth. Andre tensed. "Who's asking?" The man extended a business card. "Marcus Wellstone, Esquire, Corporate Counsel, Kingsland Development." The slick brand logo glinted beneath the street lamp. "I represent certain interests," Marcus said in that calm, practiced tone lawyers use when they're about to negotiate the sale of a soul. "May I come in? Or shall we speak out here in the cold?" Andre swallowed. His instincts screamed danger, but curiosity and the pressing need to appear unafraid took hold. "Fine," he muttered, unlocking the door. "Make it quick." Inside, the apartment was cramped. A small living area, kitchenette, a single worn couch, and a desk piled with old textbooks. The overhead bulb buzzed. Andre flicked it on and gestured for Marcus to sit, but the man chose to stand, as though reluctant to touch anything not sanitized by wealth. "All right." Andre dropped his laptop bag on the couch. "What do you want?" Marcus took a moment to examine the space. His gaze brushed over the clutter, code printouts, half-eaten takeout, an open binder of Ruth's notes, and returned to Andre, eyes gleaming with something akin to amusement. "I'm aware you and your grandfather have Complicated issues with my clients. Andre stiffened. Your clients are thieves who nearly killed him. Marcus shrugged, expression blank. That's an allegation. The courts will decide. He paused, then cleared his throat. However, we at Kingsland Development pride ourselves on forward-thinking solutions. We prefer to settle disputes amicably when possible. Andre let out a short, bitter laugh. Amicably? They just put my grandfather in the hospital. Allegedly, Marcus corrected gently, no formal charges have been filed. Could be random violence, yes? Andre's hands clenched into fists. He wanted to shout, wanted to pick up the nearest object and fling it at the polished face of this corporate vulture. But he forced himself to breathe in and out, remembering Elijah's condition. Stay calm. Stay strategic. Marcus, as though sensing the tension, pulled a folded paper from his suit jacket. Let's cut to the chase, he said, stepping forward. I have an offer for you. He set the paper on the tiny coffee table. Andre eyed it warily. A job contract, Marcus explained, smoothing the edges. We're expanding our tech department. A position has opened that you would be uniquely suited for. Your skill set, your understanding of data encryption, your knowledge of local property records, perfect for a new compliance initiative. Starting salary, $200,000 a year, plus bonuses. He paused, then laid down another sheet. And of course, a signing bonus of the same amount, $200,000, paid immediately upon acceptance. Andre's throat felt dry. That was more money than he could have imagined. Enough to buy his grandfather the best medical care. Enough to start fresh somewhere else, far from the nightmare that had overtaken them. Marcus watched him carefully. We understand your loyalty to your family. However, it's important to note that certain documents may no longer be relevant if you take this job, specifically the Carter family diaries, tax files, or anything that might conflict with your new role. His voice remained calm, but the implication was explosive. You'd simply hand them over to our legal team. We'd ensure everything remains confidential. For a moment, the world slowed. Andre's heart hammered, sweat beating at the back of his neck. He saw Elijah in that hospital bed, tubes snaking around him, bruises darkening his aged skin. He pictured Ruth's careful handwriting, her last words, her systematic evidence of theft, corruption, heartbreak. Could he really betray them both for a paycheck? Could he bury the truth just to guarantee he wouldn't be next on the hit list? He swallowed hard. And if I refuse? Marcus gave him that thin, professional smile. That would be regrettable. We can't guarantee any further consideration for your safety or well-being. Certain associates might interpret your refusal as aggression. Andre shuddered. The threat was as subtle as a bullet. Marcus extended a pen, gold-tipped, reflective of greed. You're a smart man, Mr. Carter. There's no future in fighting battles you can't win. Your grandfather is old, his health failing. Don't let this crusade kill both of you. The pen gleamed in the light. Andre stared at it, mind swirling with the weight of everything. He pictured the hospital monitors beeping. He remembered the photograph he'd received with the red ink warning. He thought about the boarded-up window at Elijah's house and the broken glass that had nearly ended them. Maybe this is the only way out, a small voice in his head whispered. Maybe you can't save him any other way. He took the pen. Marcus exhaled in relief, or triumph, or both. He turned the contract around, pointing to a dotted line. Sign here, then we'll handle the rest. Andre's hand shook as he brought the pen closer to the paper. 200,000, a job that could secure your future. The end of all these threats. Elijah safe, maybe. He told himself that if he took the deal, he could still look after his grandfather. He could ensure Elijah never worried about medical bills again. And what about Ruth's documents? The diaries? Is that so important compared to his life? His grip tightened. The pen hovered above the line. He closed his eyes, took a breath. Ruth had left him a note somewhere in the final pages. He hadn't read it all yet. He'd only skimmed half of it, but the last line had seared itself into his brain. She'd written it as if she knew his exact dilemma. If you ever wonder whether truth is worth it, remember, silence never saved anyone. The words flared in his memory, cutting through the haze of fear and desperation. He remembered Ruth in her final days, hunched over that battered desk, copying document after document, too sick to stand for more than a few minutes at a time, but refusing to give up. Her spirit had been unstoppable. She'd fought for their land, their dignity, their story, and now he was about to sign it all away for a neat bribe. His eyes opened. The contract stared back at him, blank and hungry. The pen fell from his fingers. He looked at Marcus. Something in Andre's face must have changed, because the attorney's smug certainty began to waver. "I'm sorry," Andre said, voice low, shaking, "but I'm not for sale." Marcus's posture stiffened. "Mr. Carter, don't be hasty. This is your best chance." Andre snatched the papers from the table. Before Marcus could react, Andre tore them in half, then again, until the contract lay in strips at his feet. Marcus's face went blank. His jaw tensed. "That was unwise," he said softly. Andre could barely hear him over the roar in his ears. He grabbed his lighter from the desk drawer, flicked the flame alive. Then methodically, he set one of the torn pieces alight. The paper curled, blackened, and turned to ash. One by one, he burned every last shred, dropping them into a trash bin. The smell of scorched ink and crisped edges filled the room. Marcus stared, stunned. "You're making a terrible mistake," he snapped, voice turning brittle. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Andre's throat felt raw. "I've chosen my family." The lawyer's eyes hardened. "Then you've chosen the losing side." He straightened his lapels, regaining that corporate composure. "I'll let my superiors know your decision. You realize we can't protect you now?" Andre let out a harsh laugh. "You never planned to protect me, only to buy my silence." Marcus took a step toward the door. "Your funeral," he spat, each syllable dripping with contempt. He pulled the door open. "They'll come for you next." Andre crossed his arms over his chest. "Let them." Marcus stormed out into the night, the echo of his footsteps fading down the hallway. Silence filled the apartment. The burnt scraps of the contract smoldered in the trash bin, thin tendrils of smoke curling toward the ceiling. Andre let out a trembling breath. He sank onto the couch, adrenaline crashing through him like a wave, leaving him exhausted, shaky, terrified. That could have been the end of his problems. Instead, he'd possibly made them worse. But the alternative, selling out Elijah's entire legacy, felt unthinkable. He reached for Ruth's notebook. He opened to the final page, where her handwriting had grown weaker, but no less resolute. He found the line that had saved him, the one that burned through his mind whenever he thought about giving in. "If you ever wonder whether truth is worth it, remember, silence never saved anyone." He ran his fingers over the words, imagining her voice, steady and unyielding, guiding him through the darkness. Then he flipped backward, scanning more of her notes. She documented every meeting, every phone call, every attempt by men like Marcus to coerce them into selling out. This was never about just one family, Ruth had written. This is a pattern, a system that robs people of more than just property. It steals their heritage, their future, their name. Andre could almost feel her presence beside him, urging him onward. The hush money might have saved his bank account, but it would have damned everything else. His conscience, his family's honor, the very memory of Ruth's dying days spent hunched over a desk, fighting for a cause that should have been won generations ago. He thought about Elijah, lying in a hospital bed, battered and bruised, but still holding on to hope. "If I do not live to see justice, you finish it for me, for Ruth." The vow rang through his mind like a bell. He just refused a deal that most people in his position would have grabbed without a second thought. Now he had no illusions about the road ahead. The enemy wouldn't just go away because he'd burned a contract. They'd come for him with everything they had. The phone calls would get nastier, the visits more dangerous, the shadows thicker. Yet in that uncertain darkness, a grim determination solidified in his chest. He would not let them win, not while he still had breath. The fight for justice is just beginning. More shocking twists are ahead. Don't miss a moment. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay with us. Thank you for standing for truth and justice. Where are you watching from? Let us know. Andre spent 3 sleepless nights combing through the county courthouse's digital archives, eyes red from the glow of his laptop screen. He compared thousands of scanned case files, property deeds, and court orders, searching for any trace of duplication, any inconsistency that would betray a hidden hand. Coffee cups and energy drinks piled up around him like trophies from a desperate hunt. Finally, just before dawn on the fourth day, he found it. A blurred signature scrawled on 3 separate deeds, all supposedly executed by Elijah Carter, but dating months apart. The handwriting looked eerily similar, down to each crooked letter and flourish. Yet no one had questioned the coincidence, and no official had bothered to confirm its authenticity. His heart pounded as he uncovered more. Entire sets of documents that listed Elijah's name, but bore dates that didn't match tax receipts or property surveys. Some pages were digitally stamped as received the same day they were allegedly mailed, which should have been impossible. He felt a surge of triumph, tempered by cold fury. They had forged Elijah's signature, rigged the data, and manipulated the official record to justify stealing his family's land. The same men who had threatened his grandfather and nearly cost him his life were orchestrating a grand scheme under the guise of legal procedure. The next morning, Andre marched into the office of a local civil rights attorney who had offered to help. Cradled under his arm was a thick sheaf of printouts containing every discrepancy he had unearthed. He poured it all onto the lawyer's cluttered desk. The attorney, a woman named Rosalind Drake, skimmed the pages, then shot him a startled, almost fearful glance. "I've seen some shady filings before," she said, "but this is a whole new level. If this is real, we can blow their case wide open." By noon, they had filed a new lawsuit against Kingsland Development and the local officials complicit in the fiasco. Andre felt his pulse surge with hope. Surely, armed with clear evidence of forgery, they would force the court to reopen Elijah's claim. He pictured the judge pounding his gavel, outraged at the injustice, ordering an immediate injunction to return the land to its rightful owner. He couldn't have been more wrong. Just 3 days after submitting the new complaint, they were summoned to the same courthouse, the same imposing marble corridors that seemed designed to make ordinary people feel small. In a cramped hearing room, the company's lawyers swarmed like hornets, armed with slick presentations, and introduced a barrage of technical objections. They claimed the signatures were simply digital reproductions, that the dates were clerical errors, and that the entire matter was immaterial. When Andre tried to explain the significance of the forensic data, the judge waved a dismissive hand. "We're here to assess the legality of the initial ruling," he said, "not to litigate alleged digital anomalies." He didn't so much as glance at the exhibits Andre had painstakingly compiled. Rosalind argued valiantly, her voice echoing in the small chamber. "Your Honor, these documents show a deliberate attempt to fabricate evidence. If you look at pages 12 through 18, you'll see—" "I've seen enough," the judge snapped, cutting her off. "Case dismissed." Andre felt the floor tilt beneath him, as if the courthouse itself were rejecting the truth. The bailiff barked for everyone to clear the room. Kingsland's lawyers smirked, flashing condescending glances at Andre and Rosalind. She rested a comforting hand on his shoulder, but he barely felt it. They had come so close only to be swatted aside as if their evidence was a trifling inconvenience. Outside in the hallway, he found Elijah waiting, leaning on a cane but standing tall. Bruises from his recent injuries still shadowed the old man's cheeks. His gaze flicked between Andre's taut expression and Rosalind's bowed head. "They threw it out again, didn't they?" Andre nodded. The rage boiled inside him. "They didn't even read the pages," he said through clenched teeth. "It's like they decided before we walked in." Elijah breathed deeply, pushing back the fury threatening to consume him. He closed his eyes for a moment, then reached into the canvas bag at his side. "I didn't come here to beg," he whispered. "I came to give them something they can't ignore." Rosalind started to speak, but Elijah shook his head. Slowly he turned and strode back into the courtroom. Andre and Rosalind exchanged startled looks, then followed. A clerk sputtered, "Sir, the hearing is over." But Elijah didn't stop. He walked right up to the judge's bench, ignoring the outraged hisses from the bailiff. In his hand was Ruth's diary, her final weapon, the painstaking record of every suspicious call, every forged signature, every heartbreak. He placed it gently before the judge, laying it down like an offering on an altar. The judge opened his mouth to protest, but Elijah fixed him with a stare. His voice, though soft, carried the weight of generations wronged. "You can ignore me," he said, each word resonating like a thunderclap in the hush. "But you can't ignore her." For a moment, the room felt as still as a graveyard. The gallery had nearly emptied, but a few onlookers craned their necks, expecting the judge to explode. Kingsland's attorneys frowned, uncertain how to spin this. Elijah tapped the cover of the diary with a trembling finger. "That's my wife's handwriting. She wrote down everything they did, every lie they told, every time they tried to break our spirit." His voice tightened. "She died fighting to protect our land, and I promised her I'd finish what she started." The judge recovered from his shock, lips pressed into a thin line. "Sir," he said sternly, "this hearing is concluded. You are out of order." "I'm out of options." Elijah's voice rose, but there was no desperation in it, only raw determination. "You refused our evidence. You refused to hear our case. This diary is the truth you keep pretending doesn't exist." He took a step back, leaning on his cane. "I won't beg for your mercy, because I don't need it. I need justice." Andre, watching from the side, felt tears sting his eyes. The entire world seemed to narrow in that instant, focusing on the old man and the silent ledger of his wife's final days. The judge's gavel hovered, uncertain. The tension was so thick it could have crushed bones. One of Kingsland's lawyers cleared his throat, sputtering, "This is highly irregular." "That's enough," the judge snapped, voice shaking with anger or perhaps guilt. He gestured at the bailiff. "Remove Mr. Carter." The bailiff stepped forward, but so did Andre. He placed a hand on his grandfather's shoulder, ready to lead him away peacefully, ensuring the old man wouldn't be harmed again. Elijah let his grandson guide him. Before they exited, Elijah turned one last time. "This isn't over," he said, voice resonating off the walls. "You can dismiss the papers, bury our evidence, but you'll never bury Ruth's words." Then the doors slammed shut behind them, leaving a stricken judge staring at the blue-bound journal on his bench. And for the first time in years, the grand machinery of injustice wavered, because in that final stand, Elijah Carter refused to be erased. Within hours of Elijah Carter's defiant stand in that courthouse, word of his struggle blazed across social media like a wildfire. A short video clip, captured by a spectator on a cell phone, showed Elijah carefully laying Ruth's diary on the judge's bench and declaring, in a voice thick with years of pain, that he would not be ignored. Within a day, that clip racked up hundreds of thousands of views. Strangers who had never heard the name Elijah Carter suddenly found themselves enthralled by the quiet conviction of an elderly man challenging a system that seemed determined to erase him. Tweets and posts referencing the Carter case flooded every platform, turning a local dispute into a national conversation. Community organizers began asking questions. Why had the courts refused to hear his evidence? How many other families had been displaced in similar ways? And what could the public do to help? News outlets picked up the story in rapid succession, featuring interviews with neighbors who spoke of suspicious tax notices and constant harassment. The more the story spread, the more people realized this was not just about one man's fight to keep his ancestral land. It was a lens into a larger corruption that had festered for far too long in the shadows. Calls for justice grew louder with each passing hour, forcing once indifferent officials to confront the possibility that Elijah's claims might be more than the ramblings of a powerless old man. Amid this online uproar, Elijah lay in a hospital bed, recovering from the injuries inflicted by the faceless thugs who had attacked him outside his church. Bruises marked his ribs, and his forehead bore a deep cut that required multiple stitches. Yet he refused to be silent. Whenever reporters reached out, he answered their calls from his room, voice soft but steady, urging them to read Ruth's diary if they wanted the full story. And read they did. Scans of Ruth's handwritten notes circulated on Facebook and Twitter. Pages where she meticulously documented suspicious changes in property taxes, fraudulent court filings, and the quiet exodus of elderly Black homeowners from historically significant neighborhoods. Each page of her diary read like a slow-burn exposé, a testament to her unwavering devotion to the truth. Soon, older residents from cities across the country began sharing their own experiences under the hashtag #NotJustElijah. Stories poured in of grandparents who had lost their homes overnight, of forged signatures, of a legal system that seemed designed to marginalize those without money or influence. In nursing homes and community centers, people recognized themselves in Elijah's plight. He was not just an isolated voice, he was the catalyst for an entire generation that had been robbed of security and dignity. Spurred by Elijah's courage, families dug through old records, scanning deeds, notarized statements, and any fragment of proof they could find, hoping to preserve them before these precious documents could vanish like so many others had. On the 5th day after the video went viral, Andre decided to host a digital workshop from Elijah's hospital room. Using his laptop and a hastily assembled streaming setup, he showed viewers how to back up legal paperwork in encrypted online drives. He explained the basics of scanning documents and storing them safely in multiple places, so no single entity could destroy the evidence. Though the broadcast was rough around the edges, tens of thousands tuned in, many of them elderly or caring for elderly relatives who had faced eerily similar battles. Comments flooded the live chat. "My grandmother lost her house in '98 the same way. We need to do this in Chicago. How can I help my aunt who got an eviction notice?" For Andre, each message was both heartbreaking and invigorating. It proved Ruth's suspicions were valid. This was a widespread issue, not a solitary injustice. He told stories of how Ruth had spent her final days compiling records and scanning receipts, even as her health failed. He recounted Elijah's unwavering insistence that the truth must be made impossible to bury. By the time he ended the broadcast, Carter Diaries was trending nationwide, and he had a list of over 300 volunteers, tech-savvy retirees, nonprofit organizers, college students, ready to help digitize the stories of vulnerable homeowners. Slowly but surely, they were building a grassroots firewall against the forces that had tried so hard to operate in darkness. In tandem with this surge of public awareness, a local investigative journalist named Maya Henderson published an extensive article tracing the lineage of Elijah's land and cross-referencing it with the documentation in Ruth's diary. She exposed how the same notary appeared across dozens of questionable transfers, how each judge that dismissed claims had ties to well-funded political campaigns from real estate conglomerates, and how entire blocks of historically black neighborhoods had been transformed almost overnight into shiny developments for wealthier, often white newcomers. The piece landed like a bombshell, prompting elected officials to issue statements promising to look into the matter. Within days, national outlets picked up the story, multiplying its impact. Suddenly, talk show hosts were discussing systemic property theft, generational wealth, and how a frail but indomitable old man had forced the country to confront a hidden scandal. While some commentators accused Elijah of playing victim, the overwhelming majority sided with him. The transcripts of Ruth's diary painted a picture too vivid to dismiss. It listed phone calls, tax increments, and even the bank accounts funneling money to local bureaucrats. The question was no longer if corruption existed, only how deep it went. Calls for investigations became deafening. High-profile activists demanded immediate intervention. Elijah, still weak from his injuries, found himself the reluctant face of a movement that had simmered beneath the surface for decades. Meanwhile, Andre scrambled to keep up with the influx of new data, emails from whistleblowers, and requests for interviews from journalists. Then came the news that the Federal Bureau of Investigation had officially opened a file on these suspicious property transfers. Rumors circulated online first, but a press release confirmed it. The FBI was stepping in. Their initial findings revealed a staggering 213 cases where documentation appeared tampered with, signatures did not match, or entire court proceedings seemed to vanish from official records. Agents requested interviews with Elijah and Andre, seeking copies of Ruth's diary to cross-check with their own data. Andre felt a heady mix of relief and anxiety at the news. Yes, it was progress to see federal agents acknowledging the wrongdoing, but it also meant stepping onto a higher-stakes battlefield. The corporate interests behind the stolen properties were not about to surrender quietly. Threatening letters became more specific. Elijah's hospital room received anonymous calls at odd hours, the caller breathing heavily before hanging up. Andre found suspicious cars idling outside his apartment at night. Yet with each new risk, their circle of supporters grew. Retired judges volunteered pro bono to review questionable deeds. Lawyers from different states formed ad hoc committees to share strategies for defending homeowners. Police officers, tired of turning a blind eye, began leaking internal memos about how local precincts were instructed to prioritize developer security over longtime residents. The tide had turned, and for once, those who had manipulated the system no longer operated invisibly behind sealed files and complicated legal jargon. The FBI's involvement brought them into the light. Across the country, older Black Americans, many of whom had endured similar attempts to strip them of property, began organizing under a new banner, the Land Justice Alliance. It started with small gatherings in church basements and community centers, places where, just like Elijah's neighborhood, people had once felt powerless. At these meetings, families swapped stories of intimidation, backdated tax bills, and unscrupulous lawyers who promised easy solutions but delivered only ruin. Photocopies of Ruth's diary circulated as a symbol of unbreakable resistance. Some activists had T-shirts printed with Elijah's image and the words "We stand with Carter." Others used the hashtag #LandJusticeNow to connect with supporters nationwide. Soon, protest marches snaked through the streets of major cities, each led by elders who refused to be silenced by age or fear. Andre watched, amazed, as thousands of people carried signs demanding an end to predatory development practices. When reporters interviewed participants, they often cited Elijah's dignity and Ruth's diligence as their inspiration. In Seattle, a group of octogenarians staged a sit-in at a city planning office, brandishing their property deeds. In Atlanta, a rally of senior citizens and college students demanded the resignation of local officials linked to shady land deals. Word of these demonstrations traveled far, reaching even foreign media outlets, who marveled at how one family's fight had ignited a movement. The system that had relied on secrecy and scattered efforts to maintain its power now faced a united front, each new voice echoing Ruth's unwavering call for accountability. Under mounting pressure, multiple state attorneys general announced parallel investigations. Subpoenas flew, demanding corporate emails, internal memos, and detailed financial records from the real estate developers implicated in the scandal. Some smaller fish flipped, turning state's evidence. They admitted to forging documents, paying off judges, or funneling money into political campaigns. With each confession, the web of corruption stretched wider, implicating higher-ups who had long believed themselves untouchable. Meanwhile, Elijah kept receiving visitors at the hospital, supporters, journalists, even a few city officials who professed shock at the scale of the injustice. Despite his bandaged ribs and constant fatigue, Elijah would greet them with calm courtesy, and sometimes, if they asked politely, he would let them read a page or two from Ruth's diary. That battered old notebook had become more than a log of fraudulent paperwork. It was the soul of a movement. People saw in Ruth's careful penmanship a testament to how even one dying woman's voice could rattle the pillars of power. Each time Elijah described her dedication, a hush fell over the room, as if acknowledging the presence of something sacred. Andre, on his part, found himself juggling interviews, data management, and the newly formed committees that wanted him to speak at rallies. He discovered that many older individuals were terrified even to come forward, worried that big money interests would retaliate. He reminded them that safety lay in numbers. If everyone shared their files publicly, no single household could be singled out. The movement, he insisted, must be unstoppable. At last, the tipping point came when a national television segment profiled the Carters' fight. Anchored by a popular primetime host, the story aired decades-old photographs of Elijah's family standing on their farmland, then cut to footage of bulldozers leveling a row of nearby houses under what the developers called urban revitalization. The host's tone grew outraged, citing the FBI's discovery of 213 forged or tampered cases. A final shot lingered on a close-up of Ruth's diary, its pages darkened with her steady handwriting. A single line highlighted, "We will not be erased." Overnight, the Land Justice Alliance ballooned from a grassroots network to a force that no politician could ignore. Rallies flooded Washington, D.C., and entire city blocks filled with signs reading, "Return our land" and "Stop the steal. This time it's real." Congressional leaders began drafting new federal regulations to protect longtime homeowners, ensuring that property transfers underwent rigorous audits. Political candidates tried to ride the wave, promising to champion the cause. Though many families still awaited their day in court, a sense of hope, long absent, took root. The pressure on the courts intensified, with multiple judges stepping down amid investigations. As for Elijah, he remained the heart of the uprising. Even from his hospital bed, he spoke via video calls at rallies, urging people to keep pushing. "We're fighting for more than land," he would say. "We're fighting for our right to exist, to have a history, to pass that history on." The crowd always roared. As the weeks turned into months, the Land Justice Alliance solidified its structure, forming regional chapters and training volunteers to help homeowners protect their deeds. Andre spearheaded a tech initiative, teaching seniors how to scan and encrypt vital documents, demonstrating exactly how to utilize multiple cloud services for safe redundancy. Elijah's name became synonymous with persistence, and Ruth's diary was reprinted in full, minus private family details, as an enduring testament to the power of meticulous record-keeping. Universities assigned the story to law students, and civil rights professors pointed to this movement as a shining example of grassroots activism, triumphing over entrenched corruption. The FBI investigation continued at full throttle, resulting in multiple indictments against real estate moguls and complicit officials. Some local governments were forced to set up restitution funds for displaced families. Statutes of limitation were challenged and in some cases overturned when evidence of systematic fraud came to light. For Elijah Carter, the day he finally left the hospital was a triumph in itself. Leaning on Andre's arm, he stepped into the bright morning sun to find a crowd of neighbors and supporters waiting with cheers and applause. He still ached with every movement, but his spirit soared. In that moment, he realized they were no longer fighting alone. Ruth's diary had outgrown them. It had become the heartbeat of a national reckoning. Even as the road ahead promised more battles, he felt the unshakable certainty that truth, once freed, would never again be silenced. But just when they thought the battle was over, the system struck back, harder, dirtier, and more ruthless than ever. It happened at dawn. Andre Carter didn't even have time to put on his shoes before half a dozen agents burst into his apartment, flashing badges, barking commands. "Andre Carter, you are under arrest for unauthorized access of protected court data." He barely had a chance to blink before cold metal cuffs closed around his wrists. They tore through his apartment, grabbing his laptop, flash drives, notebooks, everything. It didn't matter that the information he'd accessed had exposed fraud, forged deeds, and rigged tax documents. All that mattered now was retaliation. Within minutes, he was dragged down the stairwell in front of stunned neighbors. One woman cried out, "That's Elijah's grandson." Another pulled out her phone, filming the scene that would go viral within the hour. The footage showed Andre silent, proud, and unbroken as agents shoved him into a black SUV and slammed the door. The news hit Elijah like a sledgehammer. Already fragile and recovering from weeks of stress, Elijah Carter collapsed in the middle of the community center while holding a photo of Ruth. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. Paramedics rushed in, and within moments, the 76-year-old was being rushed to the emergency room, barely conscious. The diagnosis: severe exhaustion, stress-induced heart arrhythmia. "He needs rest," the doctor told Andre's mother. "But I'm not sure he wants it. He keeps saying he has to be in court, that he made Ruth a promise." Outside the hospital, fury erupted. Word of Andre's arrest spread like wildfire across the city. Flyers went up, hashtags ignited. "Justice for Andre," "Stand with Elijah." By the end of the day, nearly 300 people gathered outside the courthouse. Some held signs with Ruth's photo. Others carried handwritten deeds to homes they feared would be taken next. "This isn't just about one man," a young protester told the media. "This is about all of us. They arrest the whistleblower while the criminals walk free? Not anymore." News vans rolled in. National coverage began. Major anchors quoted Elijah's courtroom speech, how he'd placed Ruth's diary in front of the judge and said, "You can ignore me, but you cannot ignore her." They aired clips of Andre helping seniors back up their documents, of Ruth's meticulous handwriting exposing the scheme no one wanted to talk about. The system had pushed too far. The people had had enough. 3 days after Andre's arrest, the tide shifted. In a federal court packed with journalists, community leaders, and civil rights attorneys, Judge Aileen Maddox, a no-nonsense federal magistrate with a reputation for integrity, presided over an emergency bail hearing. The prosecution claimed Andre had maliciously infiltrated protected databases, but Andre's lawyers presented something far more potent: truth. They showed that the files he accessed were public records deliberately mislabeled to hide fraudulent transfers. They revealed digital footprints, admin accounts tied to developers who had no legal right to court systems. The judge's face darkened as each piece was presented. "These charges," Judge Maddox declared, her gavel slamming down, "are not only baseless, but reek of institutional retaliation. Mr. Carter is hereby released, and a formal investigation into the original case and prior judicial conduct will commence immediately." The room erupted. Applause, shouts, tears. Andre stood frozen for a moment before walking over to his mother, then hugging Maya Henderson, the journalist who had never stopped writing. But one voice remained missing from the noise: Elijah Carter. Still recovering in the hospital, the news gave him strength. When nurses entered the next morning, they found him fully dressed, tie tight, Ruth's photo in hand. "I've got somewhere to be," he said with quiet defiance, "and I made her a promise." He entered the courtroom like a ghost of history, weathered, frail, but unshaken. His steps were slow, deliberate. In one hand, he held Ruth's diary. In the other, a folded American flag, once presented to his father, a World War II veteran who had purchased the very land at the heart of this fight. He made his way to the witness table, ignoring the cameras, the crowd, the whispers. "I was born on that land," he said, "and they tried to steal it with ink and lies." His voice wavered, but his gaze never did. "They forged signatures, rewrote laws, and told us we were the problem. But my wife wrote the truth, and her truth is still here. It outlived her, and it'll outlive this corruption." The silence that followed was suffocating. Judge Maddox leaned forward. "Mr. Carter, this court has reviewed the new evidence, and based on the findings, I am prepared to issue a ruling." She looked across the courtroom, eyes sharp as steel. "It is the judgment of this court that the original foreclosure and land seizure were unlawful, predicated on forged documents, and sanctioned by a judge now under federal investigation. The Carter family property will be returned in full. Furthermore, restitution will be made to all verified victims of similar fraudulent seizures. A federal task force will investigate these patterns, and all responsible parties, developers, clerks, officials, will be held to account." The courtroom exploded. Cheers erupted. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment. Andre wept openly in the gallery. A woman in the back fell to her knees, hands lifted in prayer. Maya couldn't type fast enough. "And Elijah?" He didn't speak. He simply placed Ruth's photo on the table, faced the judge, and nodded. It wasn't triumph. It was peace. Outside, the crowd waited. When Elijah exited, he was met with a roar of applause. Elderly residents lined the steps, holding up their own deeds. Young activists linked arms, singing. A little girl held a sign that read, "Ruth was right." Andre joined his grandfather at the top of the steps. "She'd be proud," he said quietly. Elijah smiled faintly, looking at the city, the sky, the sea of faces below. "She already was." The bulldozers came back, but this time, they weren't here to destroy. They were here to build. On the same plot of land once stolen through forged signatures and corrupt rulings, concrete was poured with purpose, wood cut with care, and steel beams lifted under the hands of workers from every corner of the community. Where injustice once cast its shadow, justice was now rising, brick by brick, beam by beam. And at the heart of it all stood a sign carved into rich mahogany, the Ruth Carter Justice Center. It stood as a monument, not just to a woman whose quiet brilliance had exposed an empire of corruption, but to an entire movement born from her ink-stained pages. It was more than a building. It was a promise, etched in sweat, sacrifice, and the unrelenting spirit of a family that refused to be erased. Inside, every inch was designed with purpose. The first room visitors encountered was the Ruth Carter Archives, a quiet, glass-encased sanctuary where her diaries were preserved like scripture. Pages yellowed with time but blazing with truth. Her handwriting, elegant, steady, lined the walls like gospel. If they won't hear us in court, we'll speak in ink. Children, scholars, and survivors alike passed through this room, some in silence, others in tears. Every line carried weight, every word mattered. Next came the Legal Advocacy Hall, where attorneys and law students volunteered to help vulnerable residents navigate property laws, check deeds, and challenge suspicious notices. Walls were covered in maps, red pins marking neighborhoods once targeted by fraudulent foreclosures. Green pins now bloomed where restitution had been secured, and new ones were added each week. But the heartbeat of the center pulsed from a room few had expected, the Digital Empowerment Lab. Rows of computers filled the space, each station manned by seniors hunched over keyboards, guided patiently by young volunteers. Overhead, screens projected live lessons taught by none other than Andre Carter, now the executive director of the center. Dressed simply in slacks and a collared shirt, he spoke with calm authority. "This," he said, gesturing to the screen displaying a colorful software interface, "is the tool we built together. It scans public records, flags suspicious transfers, and alerts residents before the fraud happens." He turned to a room full of elderly homeowners. "No more stolen deeds. No more forged signatures. We're building firewalls around your legacy, and we're doing it in Grandma Ruth's name." Applause broke out, genuine, thunderous, lasting. The software, aptly named Ruth, Real-Time Urban Title Hub, had already helped reverse over 40 property seizures in nearby counties. And now Andre was working with the Department of Housing to expand it nationwide. But outside, beyond the headlines and awards, the quiet soul of the center still rested in a single chair. It was just after 5 p.m. when the day's bustle died down. The sun began to set, painting long golden streaks across the front porch of the center, where Elijah Carter sat in his rocking chair. His frame was thin, weathered by time, but there was strength still in his shoulders and fire in his eyes. A group of neighborhood children gathered around him, sprawled out on the steps, some cross-legged, others resting on their elbows. "Tell us the story again, Mr. Elijah," one boy said. Elijah smiled, slow and warm. He held a worn photograph of Ruth in one hand and tapped it gently. "My wife," he began, "used to say something real simple. She said truth is like a seed. Bury it in darkness, hide it under lies, push it down with concrete and steel. Doesn't matter." He leaned forward. "It still grows." The children were rapt. No one moved. No one blinked. "She wrote everything down. Every crooked deal. Every falsified tax bill. Every time they tried to scare us silent. And even when cancer took her breath, it didn't take her voice. Her words lived on. Right there." He pointed toward the building behind him. "That diary?" one girl whispered. "That diary changed everything," Elijah said, voice thick with reverence. "And now look at you, all sitting here safe, proud on land we nearly lost, on land we reclaimed. With truth, a breeze stirred. Wind chimes on the porch tinkled softly. One of the children looked up. "Do you miss her?" Elijah didn't answer right away. He looked at Ruth's photo, at her smile, the same smile that had carried him through decades of hardship, the same smile that had fueled his final stand in that courtroom. "Every day," he said finally, "but she's still here." He nodded toward the center. "She's in every line of code," Andre writes, "in every page in that archive, in every neighbor who walks through those doors knowing their story matters, and in each of you." The children leaned in. He leaned back, rocking, slow, steady, content. Inside, the lights of the center flickered on. From the second floor, Andre stood at the window, watching his grandfather surrounded by laughter and life. He had seen Elijah at his lowest, hospitalized, broken, nearly lost. And now here he was, restored not by vengeance, but by legacy. Andre turned back to his office, sat down at his desk, and opened Ruth's scanned diary on his computer. At the very end was a note, written in trembling ink, addressed not to a judge or attorney, but to him. "Andre, if the day comes when the world tells you to walk away from the truth, Remember, it was never supposed to be easy, but it will always be worth it. He closed the screen with mist in his eyes. Outside, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, bathing the entire Ruth Carter Justice Center in amber light. Elijah stood from his chair, joints protesting but heart light. He stepped slowly inside, walked down the hall lined with her words, and paused before the wall where her photograph hung, a larger-than-life portrait, eyes full of fire, wisdom, and defiance. He looked up at her, whispered, "We did it, baby." And for the first time in a long, long time, he smiled. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.